you know what really worked, it was interesting, was, when we were in a Zoom format, many of our parents obviously were at home, and when the children were in school or getting their therapies, a lot of times the parents were right there. And so the parents ended up learning a lot from our therapists. They're like, oh, I see how you do that now, or I hear the language that you use. And a lot of times then the therapist would take the time to explain to the parents, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing, this is how this helps. So in several instances, it was true partnership between the parent and the staff.
This week on the By Your Side Autism Podcast, back to school. Brett Balduf is currently the principal at Carpenter Elementary School in Park Ridge, Illinois, where he's been there for 10 years. Prior to being a principal, he was assistant principal for 6 years in District 26 in Mount Prospect, Illinois, as well as a middle school social worker for 6 years there. Brett has worked with early intervention, early childhood, and residential facilities and has worked with students for over 25 years. Brett and I take both a look back at the 2020 school year and a look forward into the 2021 school year. We reflect on what was and anticipate what could be. I've also added a new feature to this podcast. My guests and I pick a fun topic and then do a top 5 countdown throughout the conversation. In today's episode, Brett and I chose the topic, Best Vintage Video Games on a TV System. I start the interview jumping right in with number 5. I'm going to have to go with Pitfall. I'm going Pitfall because I know Mario gets a lot of credit for the screen moving right to left, but Pitfall, that screen moving to the right and the left, and I know it's a simple game, but boy, hours. I mean, I'm talking hours. And you look back and it's alligators, logs, and a hole, and it's the same sound. Like you would think that would be the worst game. Pitfall comes in at number 5 for me.
Okay, I hear that. I can see that. I enjoy playing that game too. This one, my number 5 is the game Contra. I remember that. It was a single or double player game. Now, yes, there was some guns and shooting in it or whatever, but it wasn't true depicted violence, I guess. And actually, I liked it so much that I just recently got the whole Contra package on PlayStation 4.
Wow.
There's like 8 or 10 different Contra games in it that I ended
Did they replicate the old
Same
school?
thing. It's the same thing.
No kidding.
Yes. All built into one game.
This is, I once, and this doesn't make my top 5, there was this spy game that I remember I had fondness of playing and I completed it. And I went on YouTube a while ago in some deep dive wormhole. And, I found it and I watched someone play, I watched it for like an hour of them playing because it just brought back so many memories.
Video game watching of others is a very popular activity now of our youth, like on Twitch.
My daughters, they do it. First, I didn't understand it, but as I kind of look at these lists and the history of video games, it is. And I'm not opposed to it. I do want to talk about 2020, the pandemic, and teachers. Tell me specifically what we didn't see that the teachers were doing. And I know it's an easy question of weren't teachers amazing through all this, but they really were. And what didn't we see to give it even more of an insight?
Yeah, it's amazing. I kept telling my teachers since last year, all through this year, just how unbelievable they all were during this time. I think it's hard to understand, teachers and what we do in education. There's learning that's always happening. And here teachers want to do the best for their kids. They want to be, many of them are perfectionists because they know that they're working with kids and families, so they want to do their best job. But if you remember back in March of 2020 now, when we shut down and all the kids were going to be at home, no one knew the direction that we were heading. We weren't prepared to teach kids virtually through Zoom or however we kind of moved to. A lot of people use Google too. But so behind the scenes, you have to think of, we had all of our kids at home, our teachers were at home, and we're also, when you're in a school, it's a community. People are used to being around one another, used to walking next door and talking to their counterparts and connecting with us, administration, and we're a big team, and we problem solve together, we communicate to one another, and all of a sudden you're at home. And you have a classroom of students who are at home that need to be taught. And how are you going to do it? How are you going to do it consistently? How are you going to teach as opposed to, your friend next door who is going to be teaching? So when we first started back in March, my school, a lot of school districts did things a little bit differently, but our school district did what we called learning boards. And so we basically prepared things that the kids could do at home that was aligned with the scope and sequence of our curriculum. So our teachers had to think like, how can I get the children to learn this without necessarily being in front of them for 6.5 hours, 7 hours a day? So
and if I may jump in, and I didn't think of this, and how do we, I'm repeating you, and how do we do it without walking next door and talking to my team partner on how to do this?
Right. And you're also trying to think through like the different environments that the students live in, what was going on in the families, and, then you have parents at home that also are working. And I mean, everyone knows and understands how much everyone was going through at the time. So then, then switching over to this year, when we did go like full-time Zoom and teaching kids through that, and also then using a lot of different learning management systems and platforms. We use a platform called Schoology, and a lot of our kids were learning and submitting their work through that program. And then like our younger learners were learning and submitting their work through a program called Seesaw. And, in some of these programs, the teachers hadn't even learned yet. So, they made it seem seamless. Most of them made it seem seamless, but behind the scenes, they had to learn all of the technology. They had to plan and differentiate for all their students because they're not all the same. They all had different learning needs. And there was just so much behind the scenes of learning the technology, trying to figure out ways to reach all of their kids to be able to differentiate for them and still make those social emotional connections with kids too. That's hard when they're not in front of you. So, all of a sudden now you're having to teach our students at home with programs that you're not as familiar with. And that's a very, very uncomfortable position to be in for teachers.
Have you had any conversations with other principals or anyone in the district about an adjustment time for the first couple months of the new year to be not what it should be? And do we want to let parents know, hang in there?
Yes, that's happening. And I'm sure that that's happening in districts across the state, country, whatever.
What are those conversations?
Well, let me start with conversations that we had with our teachers, specific to my building, okay? But I'm sure other people, if they hear this, they might be able to say, oh, yeah, we saw that too. Or for some of our younger learners, so let me take, for example, our kindergartners and first graders. Like everyone else, they've had totally different learning experiences, but a lot of times our younger learners, a lot of what they're learning is how to be a student. How do I come to this building with people that aren't my parents and all these other kids, and I'm supposed to be learning things here. How do I do this? A lot of like just student skills that they're learning. Being in remote, a lot of those opportunities they missed out on. Like Bobby sees, everyone's taking out their math book. I should probably take out my math book. A lot of those things, that repetitive learning, how to be a student types of things seem to have been impacted. So those kids, my kindergartners, my first graders who are moving up to first and second grade, we talked with those teams of teachers and we said, hey, you know what? You might need to spend the beginning of the year spending more time on expectations, spending more time on classroom norms, doing more explicit direction and instruction on skills. Don't assume that kids just know how to do the normal school routine, going out to their lockers and their desks and grabbing their folders and where to put things when they're done with them and where, the library, all of those things. There's going to need to be a little bit more time in the beginning of the year to do explicit instruction on being a student in our school. Some for the older kids too, but primarily for our younger learners. From a district level, we looked at our pacing guides and we're looking at where there's some skills that we want to make sure that we're going a little bit deeper on, or we spend a little bit more time reinforcing because it might not be solid with the kids yet. We have those types of discussions with our pacing guides and our assessments and maybe where they need to spend a little bit more time on instructional focus with this upcoming school year.
Were you able to learn anything about how children learn through remote learning? Is there any takeaways you went, either that reinforce an idea that you had or made you rethink of how kids learn?
I think that there's a lot of, there's a requirement of a lot of repetition in learning, and students learn a lot through others and social cues around them. We talked a lot about some of our younger learners where, when you're in a classroom and there are students, you're not quite sure what to do. A lot of times students might look around the room and see like, oh, Bobby's taking out his math book. I should probably be taking out my math book right now. In a Zoom format, you don't really pick up on some of those cues. And it's also hard to do a lot of the individual connecting and the repetition. And so, yeah, I think that was reinforcing to see how important it is to be around others for learning.
That is such a challenge. I didn't think of that. And you know what else I just realized as you're talking about the challenges? If I'm a teacher, an educator, and I'm up there standing around and doing that, that's a style. Now I've got to sit and do all that from the shoulders up. That in itself, I think, would be a challenge. So I know all this, but I guess I really didn't understand how many barriers there could be.
You pick up a lot of learning, and teachers and educators learn a lot from their students just by watching them. You're presenting a lesson and you're ready to move on. You're picking up on the nonverbals that your students in your classroom are like, I still don't know. I still don't know what you're talking about. And you pick up on it just through their nonverbals. And you could still get some of that through Zoom, but nothing like having the students in front of you.
All right, let's jump back to the video games. We are on number 4. I'm going backwards. Going back, but I can't keep going as far back as this, or we'll talk about sticks and stones. I'm going with Pong.
Oh, that is really backwards.
Because I not only do I remember it, I still have my Pong machine and it works. The only thing is I don't have a TV because you had to screw in those things to the back of those nuts and bolts. So if I got an old time TV, it would work. And I remember, just for the reason this makes my list is, although there are so many clearly more sophisticated games, this game of Pong, of 2 sticks with a ball going back and forth, was amazing every time we turned it on. And then we even had the deluxe machine where it was hockey, and all hockey was 2 extra little sticks that now was 2-on-2. So Pong makes my list because of the impact and the groundbreaking system back in the day.
Okay, that's fair. I have not disagreed with either. I am going a different route on this one, though. I enjoyed the game of Blades of Steel. It's a hockey game. I don't even remember what system it was on. It might have been Coleco, maybe. But it was the first hockey game that I played that I enjoyed. I'm a big hockey fan. And it was a really fun game. I used to play against my brother all the time. And I think it was just because it was the first good hockey game. Now, I know you said Pong had a hockey element in it, but, this was the one where they actually had hockey players and graphics were pretty good at the time.
You touched on children with special needs during this time. What were you hearing from parents, from all parents, when they were home? Whether it was what were those conversations?
How exceptionally difficult it was. I think what was tricky, and I mean, our students with more significant special needs too, is that most of the time they have a lot of related services attached to their IEPs. Social work and speech and language, or OT or PT. It was just some students were able to adjust and do okay based on how their parents were able to kind of set things up for them. It's a totally different environment. So our parents had to really rethink how they were setting up their homes to lead to good engagement through a Zoom format. On top of our teachers, when I say staff and I talk about our staff, I include everybody. So, but, to note, like our related service providers, they also had to transform their therapies. Think of occupational therapists or physical therapists that are very hands-on, guiding our students through movements that they need and stretches and exercises, those types of things. So they had to transform their therapies. It was hard for our parents. It was hard for our students. But we did every single thing that we could to make the learning environment the best that we could to meet their needs of their IEPs.
What advice did you give them? What do you know? What did you tell them? What worked? Did you find giving a message that was a good solution for the best you can during this time?
Well, a lot of it was just partnering, individual partnering with the parents and reaching out to the parents.
Partnering between who?
The staff
The
and
staff,
the parent. Yeah.
literally the staff.
Sure. Like, so for example, your special education teacher, right? We'll just say there was more frequent check-ins. How are things going? What's working? What's not working? Where do you need helps and supports? What really worked, it was interesting, was, when we were in a Zoom format, many of our parents obviously were at home. And when the children were in school or getting their therapies, a lot of times the parents were right there. And so the parents ended up learning a lot from our therapists. They're like, oh, I see how you do that now, or I hear the language that you use, or, oh, I learned really something neat in your therapy session today that I am gonna, that I can follow through with at other times. So, and a lot of times then the therapist would take the time to explain to the parents, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. This is how this helps. So in several instances, that was kind of really helpful. So that would be something I think moving forward, it was a benefit to our kids. It was true partnership between the parent and the staff.
What's something that you went, oh, I can see where there's an efficiency there. How'd you guys get better?
I just think the more you do things, that's what education is. I mean, when you talk about the progression of educators, there's a lot of trial and error. There's trying something and being like, oh, that didn't work as well as I had planned or hoped. And then you reflect on your lesson, you reflect on your therapy, you reflect on how the students received the information. Did they get it? Did they understand it? And so you process that, and then the next time you do it or something similar, you incorporate what you learned went wrong or what went right, and you keep doing it. Like I shared with you, educators weren't ready to teach kids through Zoom or through learning boards like we initially started. So, when we first started doing therapies through Zoom, it was a scramble because, when you're an educator, you have much of your curriculum and lesson plannings all done and designed for the year. And then as you move, based on the kids that you have, you tweak it for your class that particular year. So you have much of what you need for the year. There's just things that you have to alter. When we got to video and Zoom, much of how we teach couldn't be done. So they had to create what is going to work in this format. So, they would create lessons. They would think that it would work. And it was like, this didn't go over as well as I did. So now you're altering the lessons kind of as you go. So that's how we got better throughout. More time with it, reflecting on our practices, understanding how our kids were experiencing the practice and making adjustments.
This isn't sarcastic. I'm being honest.
Sure.
I love when people who are giving advice to others have to take their own advice, because it puts into practice what they're teaching. And I've heard you say many times before, it's not that we don't know it, we don't know it yet. Mm-hmm. And then you find yourself, after saying that how many times, going, oh, okay, I'm now living a world where I don't know it, but I have to take a deep breath and just say I don't know it yet.
Yep, that's the whole premise behind growth mindset, which is, it is really big. And it's just that we never stop learning, and we have to constantly reflect on our practices and what we do. And every year our kids are different. Things are different in the world every year. Each and every year, that's what's kind of fun and exciting about education. And, I don't know if parents are going to be like, wait, what? But we do keep growing each year. There's different things that we constantly work on. We haven't arrived as educators. We're not perfect. And each and every year, there's something new to learn to get better. And I think that's what's so fun and enjoyable about working with young kids. It's just that they're all so different, and trying to figure out the best way to individualize for each and every student.
I don't know this term. I'm sure I can figure out. And you maybe already explained it. Growth mindset.
Is that
what you said? Growth mindset.
Growth mindset. Yeah. It's the whole premise of you don't have the difference between growth mindset and fixed mindset. Fixed mindset is, well, this is how I was programmed. This is it. This is, I'm not good at math. I'm just, no one in my family is good at math. I'm not going to be good at math. That's a very fixed mindset. That's this belief of, well, I can't do something, or there's something internal to me that I'm not going to grow. I'm not going to learn, as opposed to like a growth mindset, which is we can do anything really that we can put our minds to. We teach our kids when they say, I'm not good at something. There's a lot to that statement, right? But it's, I'm not good yet. You can use sports for an example. Basketball. If a student came to me and said, I'm not good at basketball. Well, what they're saying might be true. Like, they might not be good at basketball. Maybe they're not good at dribbling. Maybe they can't shoot or whatever. So I always say, no, maybe you're not good at basketball yet. But how do you get good? You get good by practicing, by committing, by engaging in it, by having a belief in yourself, a motivation in yourself, a drive in yourself, and having someone who is your cheerleader on the way and supporting you and reinforcing you. Michael Jordan didn't just walk out on a basketball court and be great. He had to work at it. Reading. When you're a younger kid, you don't just pick up a book and read. You have to spend time reading, have someone read to you. You got to work on it. You got to practice. So it's having that belief and ability that even though you might not have a particular skill, you might not just have it yet, and you work on it. It's a belief that I can do this.
We are now at our number 3 of vintage. We're doing video games, not arcade games.
Yes.
So this is stuff that we kind of have memories or grew up on. I'm going to have to go with number 3, Resident Evil on the PlayStation. This is the first Resident Evil that came out. This one we talked earlier, I so look forward to this. This was to me watching a horror movie. The jump scares and the creepy music, I was so immersed in this. So when I talked about earlier about TV, this is where I started to realize, well, wait a minute, I could watch a scary movie, or I can actually be interactive in a scary movie and figure things out. Wait a minute, maybe video games, if used correctly and at the right time, maybe this is better than just mindlessly watching this. And I was reading Pet Sematary at the same time. And the nightmares I was having during this period.
Where were they from, right? Were they from Resident Evil?
So it was both. So my nightmare, I remember clearly, is that something came out of the cemetery and was like attacking me. And I was like hitting the reset button, going, start over, start over. Resident Evil to me was groundbreaking, and I looked forward to it and was quite scary. So Resident Evil makes my number 3 of all time.
I love the series, Resident Evil. Actually, before you came, my friend texted me asking if I had played like the new Resident Evil. That's pretty funny, but I did not go the Resident Evil series at all. My third one it was a little bit later, is Mario Kart on Nintendo. Now, this wasn't like from our early days, right? Because Nintendo didn't have Mario Kart out when I was a kid. I grew up with Atari and like ColecoVision. Nintendo didn't hit until I was a little bit older, but Mario Kart, I think, and Nintendo does such a great job at creating games for family-friendly games. Yeah. You know, the Marios, all the Mario games and the series or whatever, but Mario Kart is just something that you can just play over and over again and really not get bored of, because it's just, especially when you play with friends who are also good at the game. That's my number 3.
We were talking about, you mentioned adaptability. Coming back from the pandemic in person, what should parents be looking for? How as educators, what conversations are you having of starting to teach again, and educators go, who's ahead in math and who's behind? It's got to be all over the place. How do you even begin to address that?
I don't fully agree that it's all over the place. I understand why people would say that, and I do understand the concept of, you know, their year was different, and there's going to be some regression, or there was going to be some skills that just weren't as fully learned if the kids were actually in school. There's different things that we do. One is, we do, like it or not, I'm a fence sitter on this one, is we do assess a lot. They get standardized assessments. We do grade level types of assessments, and we're always kind of regularly checking like units and quizzes, all those things to make sure that our students are understanding and learning the content as we're teaching it. We also follow the standard. And for our kids that are moving forward, we continue moving them forward. For those kids who might not have learned particular skills or who aren't showing mastery on standards, we focus on it like that. If there's a pattern, if we're seeing an entire grade level didn't master some particular math skill or whatever, we'll know about it because we'll have assessed. We look at that data and we're like, they don't really have this concept down or whatever, so we reteach it. Our district has done a great job at looking at, we have like a scope and sequence, pacing guides. So for example, we know, like, our school district has 5 elementary buildings in it. So our pacing guides are out. So it'll share with our teachers, you're like, in this month, you should be covering this. In October, you should be covering this. In November, you should be covering this. If we're noticing that something isn't really mastered by the kids, we might adjust those pacing guides a little bit to just kind of make sure we're hammering out those skills. And then you might let go some of the more skills that aren't as critical as some of the key ones. So you prioritize your standards, you prioritize the learning, and just kind of see where the kids are at.
When we last talked, we talked about, is it time to re-look at how the classroom is? And you thought yes, because we talked about if we're talking special needs, we're sensory, right? Some standing desks, foot pedals, I think were one of them. Has 2020, the pandemic, changed anything for the classroom structure going into the new year?
It's tricky. I still believe what I believed from before about, I think you want to kind of design a classroom that more engages like cooperative learning. You want to set up your classroom so that students can work in groups, and students it's comfortable, and they've got flexible seating. And if they need to get up out of their desk and go and sit in a different place to be able to read and be engaged, I think that's all still there. We learned, most school, I think all schools, like, had to redesign their classrooms for COVID. And it was not how any school or any teacher that I know of wanted to set up their classrooms, right? Like, we had, for us, it was, I think the most that we could fit into a classroom was like 15 desks, and they needed to be spaced apart by 6 feet. And they all needed to be facing forward. And they needed, it felt very old school teaching. We're all in rows, and we're all need to be facing forward, and we can't, that was really, really hard for us, because we have been moving forward in our classrooms and our environments and our cooperative learning and group learning, and COVID set us back a little bit. So I think everyone's looking forward to the time that we can, put kids closer together again and be working in groups the way that we used to. I think we're getting closer and closer to that. But, I think a lot of what COVID did was reinforce what we knew about kids and their learning. Let's get back to that as soon as we can. I'll give you an example. You think of your typical kindergarten classroom, right? You bring up all your 5-year-olds and you have them sit up on the rug in front of you, and you're doing a lesson, and they're learning. They're all in this little group right in front of you. We weren't able to do that. Yeah. Right? We couldn't put kids right next to one another. They all couldn't come sit up on the rug next to one another. You had your little 5-year-olds who are just sitting at these desks that are spaced apart, like 6 feet apart, and they weren't able to do different things in the classroom. And that made it difficult. And I think it reinforced to us, like, we were doing it the way it should have been. So looking forward to that.
We are now at our number 2 for our video games. We're down to the final 2. I am going with Donkey Kong Country for the Wii. This was a 2-player game. It was an adorable game, completely family friendly. And my girls, I would play with them, and we had a blast. And it was a great family interactive game. Showed teamwork. The animation was cute, great music. I thought Donkey Kong Country is one of for me, makes my number 2. I think it's a fantastic game to play with your kids. Easy, fun, enjoyable. That's my number 2.
Okay. I enjoyed Donkey Kong Jr. That was an arcade game though, but yes. I don't want to take us there, because that could take us on a whole nother path. But anyway, my number 2 was old school. Activision.
Oh boy.
Okay. Remember the game Kaboom?
Yes. Yes.
They caused several broken controllers in my household, because those were the different controllers for Atari. They were all it was a spinner. Yes. Right? You just, I think it had a red button on the side of the controller too. But the premise of the game was there was some sort of criminal or something, I think, because they had him in black and white.
Criminal, right?
Burglar, I think he had I think he had like
hamburger.
Yeah. And he would just drop bombs, and you had 3 buckets at the bottom that you had to kind of go back and forth and catch the bombs that he was dropping. And then if a bomb got past you, you would now only have 2 buckets. You'd only have 1 bucket. And they actually, at the time, I remember this as a kid, they had contests like at local malls, right? They would set up like Ataris, and you can go there, and they had like Kaboom kaboom contest. And if you got to a certain level and took a picture and also sent it in, they would send you a patch, a kaboom patch. So there was always that goal to work for.
What has the pandemic and a year away done to the social emotional learning, or do you have any concerns on the impact of the social emotional learning?
Yeah, of course. Yes, social emotional functioning is very important. In particular to me, I used to be a social worker, so I totally understand and believe in the importance of social emotional functioning for academics. To me, it's the foundation. You have to look at, if kids don't feel comfortable, if kids have things that are going on for mental health issues or whatever, like, it makes it really hard to prioritize fractions in math, because you have to make sure that you feel safe, that you have your basic needs met, that you feel respected, that you are comfortable in the environment that you're in. All of those things have to be in place in order to have meaningful learning. And as well as like relationships, it's one of my biggest things here at my school is the importance of relationships with students with one another, and the relationships between teachers and students. And if the students don't feel like they have those relationships in place, again, it ends up impacting academic performance. So in terms of like COVID and where we were at in the social emotional functioning, it was hard because it created a lot of stress in households. So you have to know that, you have to acknowledge that. One of the other things too is a lot with mental health too is anxiety. Seeing a lot of anxiety increase. A lot of our students or families that have anxieties about health issues. This obviously doesn't help, with COVID. You also had a lot of students who had anxieties, who had school avoidance and the types of issues. This certainly didn't help, because now they've been at home for months or a year, school year, and we want people to feel comfortable to be able to come to a school environment and feel comfortable. So there's a lot of things to consider when looking at social emotional functioning and mental health. We pay close attention to with our students and our families.
What light has 2020 shown on mental health issues? Has it helped maybe understand this can go so many ways. With phones and kids with special needs, there's so much pressure now, and maybe it's a different pressure. I don't know. That's the problem with being a parent now. I can't parent from experience. I didn't have a cell phone. I didn't have, my daughter just downloaded something where every one of her friends can be tracked at any second. And they can spend spring break looking at where all their friends are, and they're not, because they have this tracking thing that literally they can see. So maybe it's just different, but I don't know because I didn't live through it. So they always have had what I feel so much pressure, online bullying, all that. What has 2020 done to shine the light on mental health issue for kids?
One of the big things that I stress to people is kids are not little adults. They're kids. Their brains are still developing. They have yet to experience the world in a way that we have. And often as adults, I see that people kind of cast their own experiences and their own understanding of the world and their perceptions. There's a lot of times that they assume that kids are perceiving things the same way that they are. And I think it's important to not do that. I think it's important to remember that, again, kids' brains are developing, they're different, they're experiencing the world differently. They're, and what we experience and how our lives are is what kind of shapes who we are and how we interact with the world and those around us. And I think this year, it did create people to ask, like, besides not going to work, in the office, and besides not being able to go out to a local restaurant or whatever, I think it created the need for people to ask those questions, like, what is the overall impact of this going to be? Besides the unfortunate stats of people who died, or people who were in hospitals, or how often people were sick, or what our positivity rate was, I think it also drove people to ask, like, how are we all dealing with this? How are we functioning? What impact is this having on the way that we are connecting with others? So in my mind, we should be asking that question all the time. How are we doing? You know what they always say, like, about being kind. be kind to someone. You don't know what they're dealing with. You don't know what they're going through. We always need to have on the forefront of our mind, like, what are other people that I'm interacting with? What's going on with them? How are they doing? Like, how are they perceiving things? That's how we should be thinking about the world anyway. In that sense, I think it's good that we are putting more emphasis on people's social emotional well-being.
We are down to our number one.
Ooh.
All the way down to our number one video game.
And this is so hard though, Matt,
I
right?
know. Well, my number one, I think, is easy. You think number one was hard or all five were hard?
I think all five were hard.
My number one's easy for me because, again, it's where I was and still, and this series I still continue to play, Tomb Raider.
Oh.
Tomb Raider PlayStation, that to me was a game changer. This solidified that I think the value of playing video games can be, I remember growing up, listen, nothing beat Friday night of Love Boat and Fantasy Island. Followed by BJ and the Bear, the truck driver.
That was a random TV show pull out.
I want to be a truck driver after seeing BJ and the Bear. I love that show. To me, the game, when Lara Croft would go into these caves and you'd have to solve these puzzles, moving this gear means this water flow goes here. Combine that with the bow and arrow play because of this strategy. Tomb Raider, and as it's grown as a series, I remember that so distinctly. And that Tomb Raider is my number one vintage game.
Okay. Well, and that was the basis of one of my favorite games that I did not put on here, but one of my favorites, like later on, was Uncharted. I don't know if you ever played that.
I haven't, and I see it keep popping up when I type in Last of Us and all that. What game is comparable? I keep seeing Uncharted.
Fantastic. But you see how Lara Croft in Tomb Raider was what got to that game. So,
and if I may, going into it because this was after Indiana Jones was one of my favorite movies growing up. So stepped right into that Indiana Jones, archaeologist, tombs and history. Well, not history. It didn't really talk history.
Well, and if I can, too, I think after this, I want to share something about video games from a principal perspective.
That'd be great.
Okay, but my number one game that I put down was Tecmo Bowl.
Wait, go ahead. No, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
No. This is your number one.
Well, Tecmo Bowl is just... It was such a fantastic game. I mean, you had your 8 plays or 16 plays that I think you could choose from, and you had your teams. Like I played this when I was younger, but then we also played it in college, right? Like we had our friends in the dorm, and both of us actually had a Tecmo system, so we had so many fun games. And then there was always the arguments, right, about which team to take because there were some players in that game that were fantastic, right?
This is why I'm laughing. Keep going.
Oh, right. I don't know if you saw this. I have a feeling I know why you're laughing. Was it the Bo Jackson?
Was it Bo Jackson or Walter Payton?
No, it wasn't Walter Payton. It was Bo Jackson.
Bo Jackson.
Yes,
okay,
yes.
So I thought it was Walter Payton. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think they had Payton in Tecmo Bowl.
Okay.
To be honest with you. But, okay, and I understand that some people are going to find, like, the humor of this show inappropriate, right? But there's an episode in Family Guy, which wasn't inappropriate. It was just hysterical, and if you ever see it, watch it. It's the scene where Peter is playing Tecmo Bowl against one of his friends, and he had Bo Jackson, and he used up the entire quarter just running Bo Jackson around the screen, and then eventually scored a touchdown with no time left on the clock. It's absolutely hysterical, but that was such a fun game.
And that's why I'm laughing, because I thought it was Bo Jackson, because I thought, well, yeah, you play that game. First of all, great game. But if you picked that team and had Bo Jackson, he was so hard to tackle. It
was very hard, yeah. That's why if you've never seen that scene from Family Guy, watch it though. It's funny. No, what I was gonna say about video games, and like when we talked about, doing the top 5 or whatever, it's like I tell my students, I play video games, and it's surprising to a lot of people. But there's, you had mentioned it, that there's some positive. I think that there's a lot of great positive things in video games. Yes, there are some inappropriate things. I was nervous earlier sharing something about Contra because it's got guns in it, right? And so, you do have to obviously you have to monitor the games. You have to understand your children when they play, especially a lot of the online things, right? There's so many online games now that kids are so into, and you don't know who they're at, who they're talking to online and all that. You've always got to be careful. But, the biggest thing about video games that I enjoy, that I think schools have to take advantage of, and they do, and we do, is the whole concept of like the leveling up or earning things in video games. Kids, if you watch them play, and the reason why they play so long, we're always like, how can you play video games for like 4 hours? It's because in video games now, there's progressions, right? If you do this, you unlock that. If you get to this level, you get to this next level. And there's an inherent reward to that. And really, what's at the heart of it is goal setting. And how important is goal setting in schools for students with special needs, obviously with IEPs and their goals and therapy goals or whatever. But when you set goals, it's rewarding to earn those goals and to work towards getting those goals. And it's built into every video game. And I said, we got to take why kids love video games and incorporate that concept into schools. Have them try to work for certain things, right? Get to certain reading levels, get to certain amount of math, get to do X amount of kind things. All of those things I think can be used in school systems.
Going back to Tomb Raider, as it progressed, my girls played it. I would make them, when they got stuck, I wouldn't let them go to YouTube, as silly as this is, but it was almost like homework. I said, try to figure out that puzzle, give it a half hour. Because there are many times in the game where you're just sitting there in the same room going, it's like an escape room. Like, I don't know what to do. And I'm like, the clues are there. Find those clues. To me, it replaced TV watching. And I thought, well, people can watch, take us. We'll watch a 3-hour football game, or we'll watch, we'll binge, 4 hours on The Office, and nobody says anything. But the stigma is, oh my gosh, you play 3 hours of video game? Well, what's the difference between that and watching football? I'd argue that there are some times where it's actually better to watch video games. Clearly, the pitfall, look at that, I just brought it back to number 5. The pitfall would be you play too long,
sure,
or it's too violent. You say, clearly, or you're not going out with friends. I get that. But any worse than us growing up and spending all time doing TV? So I'm glad you mentioned that, because I do think.
Well, and it's like you said, it's watching football a lot of times is passive. Depends on how you celebrate. The video games are interactive. They're problem solving. They're puzzles. There's fine motor skills that are required. It's quick processing. Like I said, the goal setting in there. But like what I'll tell you, what you did though, Matt, is you talked to your daughters about it. Because Tomb Raider, there was some violence in it, but I'm sure you talked to your daughters about, hey, we got guns or the bows and arrows or things like that. Like you knew what they were doing and you talked about it, which is different than students who might just get off on one of these violent video games for a long period of time without having the processing with somebody who fully understands it, that can kind of talk it through with them. So,
what do parents need to know going into the school year? Or what misconceptions would you like to dispel going into the school year? Clearly things can change in the news, what's happening, but as it stands now, what do you want parents to know and be prepared for going back to full on in-school learning? What are you worried about?
I just think the biggest thing is the partnership with the school. To know that all of their teachers and all of their staff have the best interest of their children at the forefront of it's their goal. It's the reason why they get up. It's the reason why they come to school every day, is that they want what's best for every single child that's in their classroom, period. And, sometimes if there's things that are going on, or if there's concerns that they have, parents that is, reach out to your child's teacher, reach out to the school. If this is parents with children with special needs, you have a team of people that are all working the best interests of your students. If you're looking for, just an update, like, hey, how are things going? Or is there something that we can be doing at home? If there's something that we can be doing at home to support my child's learning at school, share that information. We're a team. Not one person is just the know-all, be-all, end-all for your child. So and people, the phrase, I don't like necessarily using it, but it takes a village, right? But there's truth to that. It takes a lot of people working together, the best interest of our kids. And the other piece is that, everyone, I think we've seen, there's been a lot of people who have a lot of different opinions on a lot of different things. I always tell people, get down to the core root, which is Everybody has the best interest of kids. Number one, you just might view the best interest being something different than somebody else. So it's just learning to talk, have open conversations, to understand everyone's reasons, rationales for approaching and education in the way that they are, or goals in the way that they are, instruction, therapy in the way that they do, and just, promote open dialogue and communication. That's the biggest thing.
Let's leave with this. Give me one emotion going into this school year.
I'm excited. Hey, it's hard because I try to teach our kids too that often they're going to experience more than one emotion at a time. But
you're excited.
Yeah, I am. I don't think that this is totally going to be like it always was before. But I'm excited every year to start the school year. I'm excited to have our kids come back to the building, to get reconnected with one another, to renew the learning that they were doing, and just at a different grade level. So I'm excited to get started again.
I've been your host, Matthew Croak. A small correction to make, upon further review, Walter Payton was indeed in Tecmo Bowl, even though he retired the previous year. And although Bo Jackson for the Raiders was a much better running back, I always picked the Bears, as I like the combination of Payton on offense and middle linebacker Mike Singletary on defense. I'd love to hear your favorite vintage video games or any suggestions for a future top 5 or guest idea. Send me an email at podcast@byyoursideac.com. To learn more about our speech, occupational, and ABA services in one of our many centers, you can visit us at www.byyoursideac.com or visit us on Facebook. Thanks for listening.